Hi 131, I hope you had a good quarter so far. And in this tutorial, we'll be having a basic introduction to the tools you'll be using in Photoshop in order to manipulate and post-process an image that you pull into the software. And so this tutorial is going to split into an introduction to four main tools that you'll be using, and just a best practice you can employ into your workflow in order to make your life easier and just work more efficiently. And so the four main tools we'll be going over in this tutorial is specifically the image size, canvas size, crop, and transform tools. And we'll just be going or introducing the layers panel in Photoshop and how this could help you in your process again. And so once you pull your photo into Photoshop, you could kind of just review the properties of your image by going into the image size or image size tool in Photoshop. And so how you get into this tool is by navigating into the image tab in Photoshop and then going down into image size of this toggle down menu. And as you can see here, the shortcut for this on the Windows software is Alt-Control-I, or on Mac users, this shortcut would be Option-Control-I. And so once you open this, this tool, you'll be prompted with the image size, the dimensions of the image that you pulled in. In this case, my image is 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. And then there are these different menus that you can just manipulate in order to, for lack of a better word, manipulate your image size, right? And so we can begin by having a little discussion on the resolution of your image. And so how I pulled my image into this document specifically is that it is at a resolution of 300 pixels per inch, right? And what this is referring to is oftentimes the DPI or PPI of your image. And so for those who are unfamiliar with that, DPI kind of just refers specifically to the dots per inch of your image. And this is oftentimes referring to print reproductions of whatever you're trying to print. And so oftentimes it's just a best practice to print at a minimum of 300 DPI because the scale of our images are often pretty large. And so just for clarity and for it to not be blurry or grainy or pixelated, it's just a good practice to have a minimum of 300 DPI for the things that we produce. And so likewise, PPI or pixels per inch kind of expounds on this quality just with digital reproductions of whatever you're trying to export digitally, either as a PNG, a JPEG, a PDF, what have you, right? Those digital products, right, that host digital, I guess, files of your image or whatever you're trying to show. And so having that in mind, we can refer this to the fit2. And so currently, this is set to a fit of the original size of the image at a resolution of 300 ppi. And so if I were to change this, the dimension of my image, this is kind of just referring back to the resolution as well as the dimension of my image, right? And so again, my image is currently at the original size it's set at. But if I were to set it to one of the presets that Photoshop gives me to the DPI, you can see that, or PPI in this case, right? You can see that this PPI has a specific size that it will show you at, right? And so kind of just an analogy of how this just relates to these sizes and the PPI and DPIs you can see here is that you can kind of just think of it as like if I saw a video at 1080p, right, 1080 pixels, there's a pretty large image of my image, right? And so you can kind of see this, I guess, in both versions of the 144 pixels per inch, right? There's a small size and there's a large size, right? And for the 72 pixels per inch, it's a small size as well as a large size, right? And for the dots per inch, right, it kind of sets your image to the letter size for printed documents and a legal size, right? And so for the purpose of this tutorial, we can just kind of ignore this part, but this is kind of just a tidbit that you could keep this in mind if you were wanting to fit this into a specific paper size or dimension or pixelated dimension that you want to set it to. So with this in mind, we can just kind of go ahead and manipulate the image size of our image, right? And so what this is going to do is just adjust our image in its totality, right? And so again, my image is pulled in at a 6,000 by 4,000 pixel and a 20 by 39.333 inch image, right? And so if I were to adjust my image into, let's say, 15-inch image width and 10-inch height, you can see that the height was adjusted automatically, as well as, you know, the pixels, right? And I could, I guess, like in theory, adjust my unit size into whatever unit, right? But you can see that the width and height was adjusted according to the aspect ratio that it was pulled in as, right? And so if I were to adjust into this new size, either smaller or larger, right? It preserves that aspect ratio. And what I want to keep in mind if I do this and resize my image is that I want to have the resample checked. And so what this is going to do is that if I were to just enlarge my image, right? Everything is going to be kind of enlarged, right? For lack of a better word, right? If I were to make it smaller, everything is going to be compressed, right? And so things might be kind of funky in that way. So what resampled is going to do is that it's going to preserve the pixels per inch or dots per inch that I've set, and this is just going to be employed throughout the image being resized, right? And so the quality is going to preserve depending on however I resize my image to. And if I hit OK in order to enable the change that I made, you can see that my image was or is adjusted accordingly. But for the case of this tutorial, I want to keep my image how I pulled it in at 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. And I'm just going to undo this by hitting Control Z. And so this kind of just brings us into the next tool, which is the canvas size tool in Photoshop. And how I'd access this tool is by going into Image, again at the top bar, and then navigating my way down to canvas size in the same kind of menu. And again, as you can see here, the shortcut for canvas size tool is Alt-Control-C, and on Mac, this would be Option-Command-C, right? So when I open this, you can see that I have my current size. Again, it's a 20 by 13.3 inch image. But let's say I wanted to expand my canvas size into a larger kind of thing. You would have these different boxes that you can hit in order to manipulate the canvas size that you'll be working on. And you have this relative check mark and an anchor check mark. But for now, we'll set it to its default, which is you're probably seeing just the width and height with the current dimensions of your image, right? And so what canvas size is going to do is it's going to expand your, I guess, working area, right? It's not going to expand your image itself, but it's going to expand your working area of the editable portions or editable and visible portions of your image. And so that's going to make sense once I complete this manipulation. But if I were to, I guess, expand my image in all directions to, let's say, a 23 by 15 inch image, you can see that in the anchor, it kind of adjusted itself, but in order to make it clear. But if I were to set my anchor in the center, you just saw that it's going to expand my image up and bottom, at the top and bottom, as well as the left and the right. And if I hit OK in order to enable these changes, you can see that reflected here, right? With that anchor in the middle, my image expanded, or I guess my canvas expanded at the top, the bottom, and the left and the right. And so I'm just going to undo this again and do Alt-Control-C as a shortcut for canvas size. And if I were to change my anchor to this one corner, and again, change my image to a 22 by 15-inch image, then my image is going to expand at the top and at the right. Because I anchored my image to this corner, it's just going to adjust it in 2 dimensions rather than the 4 that I showed previously. So I'm just going to undo this again, and I'm going to hit Alt-Control-C. And if I were to check relative, as you saw before, everything was changed to 0. And so what this is going to do is I won't have to worry about the totality of my canvas size, but rather how much I want to expand my image to. And so this is going to expand my image relative to whatever kind of expansion or contraction, if I wanted to make my canvas size smaller, relative to the current canvas size, right? So if I were to do, in this case, if I were to make it smaller, I'd do -5, and you see that all the images flip, or all the arrows flipped inwards. And I'll do a -2 kind of height. And then I'll leave the anchor in the middle, but you'll see that my image is going to contract 5 inches in width. So 2 inches on either end, 2.5 inches on either end, and then 1 inch on top and the bottom. And so you can see that just contract completely inwards, right? And again, if I were to do this with a different kind of anchor, you will see this reflected accordingly as well. So I'm assuming it's the same anchor as the bottom right corner that I used before, and my image will contract at the top and to the left. And so you can see that reflected accordingly too. So I'm just going to undo this again by pressing Control and Z. And then this leads us to the crop tool. And so how do you be able to access this is by navigating to your side toolbar. And it's going to be the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th tool, counting from the top to the bottom. And so this is going to crop your image, as you can see in this kind of preview of the tool, in whatever crop that you're going to set it to. And so you see that you have these, I guess, like areas or editable areas that you can adjust. And so let's say I wanted to make a smaller crop of my image, just looking at the model itself, right? Or at least the model that I'm not pulling off, right? And so this, just by its name, just crops my image into wherever I want to show. And in order to enable these changes, I have to press Enter. And so now my image is cropped to specifically a more enhanced portion or just focused portion of my image, right? And I'm going to undo this. And one thing to note in this crop tool is that you'll be given these 9 boxes or 3 by 3 grids in this crop. And so what this is kind of just referring to is just the rule of thirds in photography, right? And so the rule of thirds, for those who don't know, is that oftentimes the images, it's easy to align, or it's going to be critical to align your image into one of these grid lines in order to divert or emphasize your attention to a specific portion of your image, right? And so that's just one thing to know, or just take note of when you're cropping your image, right? So if I wanted to, I guess, focus on this part of the model, then I'd align this grid line And I'm just doing this pretty roughly to the center of this kind of pull out of my model, right? And pressing enter, your eye is kind of just drawn to this kind of axis or this third of the image, right? So that's just one thing to think about when you're using the crop tool. And I'm just going to undo this again. And this leads us to the transform command in Photoshop. And so one thing to note in Photoshop is that, let's say I didn't select this layer, right? And I wanted to transform my image. I won't be able to do that because transform is specific to the layer. And if I were not selecting the layer, then I wouldn't be able to transform my image. And so you just have to make sure your images or layer of your image is selected, and then go to edit, and then navigate yourself to transform. And in this tutorial, I'll be reviewing the scale, rotate, skew, distort, and perspective transformations in Photoshop. And so we'll just begin with scale. And what this is going to do by its name is just, it's going to scale your image according to whatever kind of scale that you decide. And so as you can see that it's just scaling my image according to the aspect ratio that it was originally at and what I pulled it at. But if I did not want to do that, I would hold down Shift, and then I could adjust my image according to or I guess to a new aspect ratio that I will set it at. And once I let go of Shift, then my image is set at a new aspect ratio, and then I'll be able to now transform my image into the new aspect ratio that I've set it at. And so I'm not holding Shift now, but you can see that it's being adjusted to that new aspect ratio again. So I'm going to undo my transformation, and this kind of leads us into the other transformation tool, which you can access again with the edit tab and navigating yourself to the transform part of this tab. And we'll just rotate our image. And so by its name, this just allows us to rotate our image to whatever kind of angle that we set it at with this bubble text for us to reference back to. And at the same time, well, I guess, yeah, it'll just enable us to rotate our image to whatever specified angle that we set it at, right? So I'm just gonna undo this rotation. And this again leads us to another transformation tool, which is the distortion, or the skew, rather, going down west. So what this is going to do is just like kind of just shear our image horizontally and vertically, or a combination of both if we decide to do so. And so you can see with the arrows that are hovering here is that this is going to shear my image horizontally. And so you can see how much of an angle my image is sheared at with the bubble text that you can see at the top. And the same applies if I were to shear it vertically as well. And so it kind of shears it interestingly when I hold down or press down or manipulate a corner. And there's just unique effects when this is sheared at the corners, or a combination of all three of these, right? I can shear vertically, horizontally, or at the corners, and it's reflected so with this edit. And I'm going to, I guess, with this change, I'm going to undo it first, and this leads us again to another transformation tool at the distortion. And what this is going to do is kind of similar to what you saw me do with the shear command or the shear tool, or rather shear or skew tool, sorry. It will allow me to adjust my image accordingly with a combination of just being just skewing it in a multitude of directions, as you can see here. And we can do this to whatever my desired effect is. And so you can kind of see that whatever node I pick, it's going to distort it in all directions, right? It doesn't matter if I were to do this middle one. Before, I would only be able to skew it horizontally, but now I can skew it vertically, horizontally, and wherever I want it to. So that's just a brief rundown of the distortion part of the transformation tool. And by undoing this just leads us to the last part of the transformation tools, which is the perspective transformation part. And so this tool is, again, just another kind of implementation of this skew command. And this allows us to skew it vertically, horizontally, but this kind of just treats our entire image as a plane, right? And so if I were to draw my image back, my entire image is skewed on both ends in a plane going back, if that makes sense, right? And if I were to do this on the other side as well, it would do it likewise too, just going back that way, right? And then I can just skew my image vertically, horizontally, but these corners just treat my image as a plane, right? And so that distorts the perspective, or rather transforms my perspective into a kind of new vantage point of my project. And so with that, this leads us to the last portion of this tutorial, which reviews and introduces the layers panel in Photoshop. And so just as a brief overview of this, just having different layers in working in Photoshop makes your life really easy, in that if I were to make a new kind of edit onto this image, if I were to, let's say, draw several lines on it, right? First, I'd have to select the layer first of all, and then edit right onto it, as I kind of mentioned before with the transform tool. But if I were to draw on this, right, I wouldn't be able to separate this brush mark with the rest of my image, right? Because if I turned off this layer, then everything completely goes away. But if I were to undo this first, if I were to make a new layer with this icon at the bottom with the square and the plus, or with the shortcut Control-Shift-N, and then I name it, I guess, like brushes, then I'd be able to separate my brush stroke with my image, right? If I were to turn off this layer, then the image behind it, or the layer behind it, is preserved, right? So this is kind of just an easy way of just separating my edits into different parts of the image, and allows it to be more editable and manipulated according to however I want it desired. And so you can see how, if I were to transform this, let's say, you can see how this could be applied to only this layer, right? And that kind of just allows just ease of flexibility in my workflow. So I hope you find this tutorial helpful, and I hope it helps you in the tasks and projects that you're doing for this assignment. And I wish you the best of luck. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us ISAs through email, or send an appointment with us through Zoom, and we'll be happy to help you out. Thank you.